Great. Okay, so we'll get started this morning. So yeah, welcome and good morning to everyone and to our speaker, Stephen Harper. You're very welcome to session 37 of our Essential Skills webinar series, with today's topic being an introduction to persuasion and influence techniques. Some of you may have joined our Essential Skills series last year, where we also had Stephen Harper, so he's kindly revisiting us to cover this topic. So yeah, I'm just going to run through a small bit of housekeeping before handing over to Stephen. So just to mention that there will be time at the end for a Q&A. And just to make sure that you're using the Q&A function in the Zoom toolbar rather than the chat function for any questions you want to ask Stephen regarding anything that's covered today. The second thing is just to say, if you are experiencing any technical difficulties whatsoever, just to use the chat function, we'll be monitoring that to mention, to message ourselves. Or if you can't use the chat function, you can email cpdtraining@engineersireland.ie or use the number on screen there. Just at the end of the webinar as well, just to mention that there is an online survey, and when you leave the webinar, you'll be directed straight to it. We really appreciate if you provide your feedback through that. It is really valuable to us in refining what we're offering. And Stephen will also chat you through an extra element to the survey based on some research that he's doing at the moment. So look, I'll be back at the end for the Q&A, but for now, Stephen, I'm going to hand over to yourself. I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Right.
And I'm going to disappear.
Thanks very much, Niamh. I presume you can hear me okay? Nothing's okay and you can see me?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, thanks very much, Niamh, and thank you for Engineers Ireland, everybody's attending. It's a privilege to be back here after last year's webinar, so it's very exciting. So this topic I decided to do on persuasion influence techniques, which is something what Niamh said in my research and kind of it's becoming quite an interesting topic and quite important to communications. But before I start talking about the webinar, I just want to mention, as Niamh mentioned, a research project which I've started involved with. Well, TU Dublin is who I'm a lecturer, who I work with. We are together with other partners around Europe, university partners around Europe. We are working on a research project which is involving engineers and communicating and collaborating and internationally, and how that all, what is kind of needed or what is lacking in terms of engineers and their professional skills surrounding communications. So the idea is that we start producing maybe courses or workshops to develop these skills for any graduates or professional engineers. So, and the idea of this webinar, apart from it being an informal webinar of essential skills, is we kind of wanted to maybe incorporate a little bit into the research project. So I'd appreciate if you can, at the end, we will send out a form or survey form just for you to fill in on questions on the webinar, on the content, and how relevant you thought it was, or how useful, how clear it is. So hopefully that'll be okay. So onto the webinar content. So what's persuasion influence skills is, and what I'm seeing is, what I'm kind of thinking is, we use this all the time, and I think it's quite a sought after skill, because really when we're interacting with people all the time, we are always trying to convince others. We can maybe use it in marketing, sales, or everyday interactions, and essentially it's getting people to agree or take specific actions. Maybe, and also maybe if you want to sell projects. So if what I've always worked in is the civil engineering sector, which I think many of you do, there's a tendency where we need to some extent sell our projects to the public or even to our clients, and a lot of time our client is the public. So if a project's going through planning, then there's that element that we need to convince that this is the kind of the good solution, you know. And of course, if we're leading teams, we're working with people all the time. If we're leading people, we need to convince them or persuade them to do certain tasks or on working on a project, or even if on a personal level, maybe you want to have an argument, or you want to convince your children to go to bed early, whatever it is. It's almost really the fundamentals of communication that we're using every day. And just what I have to say is, because it was funny when I started developing this lecture over a year ago, about around a year ago, I had one student, after I was telling him I was going to be teaching this, a rather disgruntled student kind of came up and said, well, this is manipulation, isn't it? This is not how we manipulate people. And I said, well, you can say it that way. It is absolutely manipulation. If your ethical morals are that way, if you can use it manipulation, or you could, if you have your, hopefully, if you're questioning this, you have your moral principles, and maybe you don't want to manipulate people. So absolutely, these are skills, but I hope that you have some ethics in using this and use it to influence for the good, for whatever you need to do. So I hope it's an interesting one. As in, it is kind of very introductory to these kind of skills. There's a lot to it. There's a whole wide range to all of these skills. Okay. So what I want to start off is just asking yourselves, asking the audience, if I were to ask you to sell a pen, like a simple pen that we use every day, to someone, think about how would you go about selling that? How would you go about convincing someone to buy the pen from you? You know, maybe if you want to write in the chat, absolutely, and then we can maybe readdress it at the end of the session. I'm interested in getting your thoughts on how you would do it. Maybe you'd think about like telling the usefulness of it, or the simplicity of the pen, or how like supply and demand. So just have a think about how would you go about it? I'm not be by all means, please write in the chat your answers. Okay, so hopefully there's answers on there. Maybe Neve, you can have a look through them and give a bit of a summary at the end. So we'll come back to that at the end, but how I want to start off is discussing a little bit about one from popular culture and this series. Maybe some of you are familiar, hopefully a lot of you are familiar, others maybe not so, but this in Game of Thrones is a TV series which it has a lot of personal interactions. There's a lot of kind of psychological play and going on, convincing, manipulating, and all of this going on. But it's Game of Thrones is a series in which a lot of people, a lot of characters are vying for power. They're always trying to kind of go up the ladder and gain more power. That's kind of the name of the book, the original book. And the series is Game of Thrones, is the people just trying to get to the throne essentially, or just getting higher and higher. But what I want to talk about is these two kind of principal characters is Tyrion Lannister and Ned Stark, and how the very different ways that they go about interacting with people to kind of bring their influence. Okay. So if we start with this first character, so Ned Stark. So Ned Stark is a lord. Like he has a very high position of power anyway, and maybe he doesn't really need to get any higher. He's quite humble. He's very humble. He's very honorable. But in the series, in the first series, he gets himself into this situation where amongst a lot of different characters who are very cutthroat and vying for power and really trying to get up the ladder, because there's a bit of a power vacuum which he has just become in the middle of. And so how does he typically go about his interactions? He's because he's such an honorable man, he's always thinking of maybe the greater good. Okay. He's not thinking about the other people and what they are. And when he's interacting with, he's saying, well, what would I do if I were in their shoes? How would I do? I'm very honorable. How would I go about this? And that's always his very train of thought. And of course, these other people are not quite so honorable as he would like to be. And if anybody knows from the first book, that doesn't really work out too well for him at the end, as he ends up getting his head chopped off. And that's the end of that character. So, but he's very interesting. He's a very influential character in the series, but just not very good at personal interaction to some extent. But on the other hand, we have Tyrion Lannister, who does have some influence and power, but he cares about things in a very different way. So Tyrion Lannister is a dwarf. He doesn't have any kind of physical power or presence per se, but he is very intellectual. And throughout the series, he gets himself into a lot of these kind of situations where he's about to be killed, or he's about something bad's about to happen. But every single time he manages to talk himself out of the situation. And throughout the series, he's a lot of situations he gets himself into, but eventually he does rise to a fairly decent position of power towards the end and survives most of the entire series. But how does he go about doing this? Whenever he's in a situation, he's always thinking, what does this person need or want? Okay. He's always thinking that, or trying to understand the other person's motivations or drives. And is always asking, trying to find that information and then demonstrating that how he can kind of provide it, making them feel important. And that is the big difference between these two characters. One who doesn't last very long, and the other one who gets himself out of some very dangerous, deadly situations and manages to go up and rise up quite well. Tyrion is always thinking about always in the mind, what do they want? What do they need? Whereas Ned Stark was always, what would I do in their situation? And that's, I think it really highlights for me, I think a big part of how we influence and persuade people, how we communicate with people is putting ourselves in their shoes. And that's kind of the one major lesson from this. So I want to reference first this book, which I did. If anybody saw the webinar last year, I think I did have a similar reference from this man called Dale Carnegie, who was a public speaking trainer about 100 years ago. And he wrote three books, the first of which was, this one is probably the most popular, called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And although it was written a long time ago, and some of the stories are quite outdated, per se, the fundamental ideas behind it are still very relevant today and very, very useful, very, very interesting. Okay. So, and it kind of comes on maybe very simple but very powerful premises. And this first one is on how the concept of how every single person, every one of us on some level wants to feel important, because we all have this emotional center. We all have this ego, which is always kind of driving through us, and we always telling us, are we safe? And always looking for positions of being more safe. If we feel important, yeah, that means we feel like we're being more accepted by other people, and therefore we are maybe feel a bit more confident, more relaxed. Okay, so that's kind of the fundamental one. So a lot of these skills and influencing comes down to like making people feel important on some respect. And so how do you do that? Is what Tyrion Lannister is always thinking of is be always aware of what other people want. Like we all have egos, we all have this emotional center, and we're always looking out for number one for us and thinking about what we want. But a really important technique is to think about what other people want. And that'll come hopefully a bit more elaborated during the webinar. And so how do we do that? If we're always, how do if we want to make people feel important, if we want to know what they want, is essentially what we need to do a lot of time is put ourselves in the position of others all the time. Try and see it from their perspective. Now, it's not an easy thing to do, but it does generate that kind of empathy and maybe connection that everybody's looking for. If you're running in the kind of the shoes of the other person, that kind of means that you start maybe understanding their side of the story and understanding what their motivations are and what their drivers. Okay. Once you have that, once you can start understanding that, that really starts allowing you to then maybe putting down arguments or putting down reasons to do certain things or see the things from your point of view as well. So what I want to talk about is this one, which I think is what a very sought after skill as well. And this is a book I've read not very long ago by a man called Chris Voss. So And this is on negotiating skills, which I think every single one of us in some ways does some kind of negotiating on a daily basis. Okay. And some people maybe negotiating deals or negotiating contracts or whatever, or we're just negotiating maybe a better pay or better work or whatever, or something, negotiating where we're going to go to pub or what we're going to do tonight or whatever. We're always negotiating. Okay. And so this book by a man called Chris Voss, who was a former FBI hostage negotiator. So he was a man who would go all around the world and negotiate for the release of hostages from either terrorists or anybody. So, and what this book is a summary of his career's experience and everything they found out. And this is very much, very much about how he influenced other people. Okay, and what the main premises of his book. Now, I'd highly recommend anybody to read the book if they're interested in negotiating. But the first one is first understanding motivations and emotions of the other people. So Chris Voss, so the FBI, when they were figuring out their negotiating strategies, it was not so much about studying theory or how from the textbooks on negotiating strategy. They would go from experience, and their experience would develop certain techniques, which is what was started putting to use, and they're finding that these are working. A lot of them were down to be understanding emotions. And the first one was understanding the motivations and emotions of the people they are negotiating with, which are almost all the time humans. Okay. And understanding how humans, how emotions and our drives really puts in a good standing. And Chris Ross really expertly details that putting yourself on the shoes of the other party helps you to see the insights and what drives their decisions. Okay. And then this is establishing a rapport. So establishing some kind of connection. Now, you might seem that maybe difficult to do that when they have a hostage, they're seen as bad people because they've taken hostages. But establishing that rapport and establishing that connection is very crucial to, and what he found in any negotiation. And what he found is that having that kind of empathy is crucial for establishing rapport. When you start putting yourself in their shoes and demonstrating that you are being empathetic on some level with what they are trying to achieve, puts you in a good standpoint. Because what that means is you can start building trust and then create a productive atmosphere and then start talking a bit more relaxed in a relaxed manner. But how you establish rapport and how you demonstrate empathy or even be empathetic is with active listening. So when we start listening, we start finding cues, building up information about the other party. And this is really a good way of demonstrating empathy and encourages then the other party to open up and even share more information, lead into a better understanding of the needs and drives. So a lot of time we're listening a lot of time, like a lot of us are probably listening, and maybe with with an aim to think about how we're gonna respond, rather than actually listening and understanding what the other person is saying. And so when you have all of these elements, that's when you start creating an influencing behavior and maintaining this positive relationship by understanding their motivations, by having empathy, by establishing rapport and actively listening, allows any negotiator and his experience to influence the counterpart's emotions and decision making. Okay, because I'll try and demonstrate a little bit more. All decisions are emotional. So kind of a summary of all of that, and coming back to what I've just said before, is always thinking from their perspective. What do they want? What do the other persons want? So in a hostage negotiation, what do they want? A lot of time they're looking for money or some kind of leverage or something. You know, how being empathetic and understanding that, even if you doesn't mean you have to agree with it, of course. And that's what I was saying, when you understand another point of view, it doesn't mean you're agreeing with it. It just means you're being empathetic and understanding what that point of view. Okay. And of course, this is empathy, and this is from what I'm finding. I don't know what is it, but a white blob here, but this is what empathy is, and what I'm finding from my own study of communication, this idea of empathy is almost like the foundations of all communication. Okay, so whenever we're like communication, it's always when we're trying to pass on a message from us to someone else. We're either doing the drawings or we're doing with reports, an email, WhatsApp, any kind of communication. But the most important thing is to understand and see the point of view from the person you're trying to communicate with. So considering the audience and considering the receiver of their message and doing that through empathy, understanding their point of view will make that message out that much more effective. Okay. So when you write your email, if you think about who's going to receive it, if you're being empathetic with the other person, maybe thinking their inbox is full of emails every day, and how do you make it a bit more simple for them? So will help in getting that message across, of course. So this empathy, for me anyway, in my opinion, is the most fundamental, important part of anything, of any communication. And so then that really comes down to listening. Like from my experience, a lot of us are not good at active listening, particularly if we're annoyed, if we're hungry, if we're tired, or whatever. We tend to just think about ourselves and not really listen to the other person or what their issues are. And this is kind of an important skill. This is something really in any kind of communication. I think it's something we can easily train throughout our day in order to become better listeners. Because if you become a better listener, you then become more empathetic. You then start understanding other people, and then you can be a much better communicator. And if anybody who works in an engineering projects, you know, the effective communication is key to successful projects a lot of the time. So coming back to Dale Carnegie's take, and I realize there's a fair bit of text on the screen right now, but what I really like about this quote from his book is it summarizes that idea of listening and how important it is in it being communication. So when we're thinking of being a good communicator, it's passing on a message, it's being able to speak well. But I think it seems a bit contradictory, really. But being a good communicator means actually just listening, but being attentively listening. So what he says is, so if you aspire to be a good conversationalist, be an attentive listener. So being attentive as being present, completely present with the other person. To be interesting, be interested. Ask questions that the other person will enjoy answering. Encourage them to talk about themselves and their accomplishments. So I'm sure we all know, and especially me, now that I'm not as shy as I used to be, I love to talk about myself, and we all love to talk about ourselves. And what happens when we're talking about ourselves is something, especially when it's something that's really important to us, is then we feel important. And then coming back to the very fundamentals of it, that feeling of importance is extremely important when you're starting to build a rapport and starting to build that kind of relationship where you can then start convincing or influencing whatever you may do. So remember that people you're talking to are always 100 times more interested in themselves and their wants and problems than they are in your problems. So this is really the showing your active listening really starts to build up that rapport. Okay. And so if you think about it, persuasion and influencing skills, how we use it in our everyday. I'm sure we're all familiar with how we applying for jobs because we need to make a living. Maybe some of us are businessmen, we need to sell our products, but essentially it's a similar kind of thing. You're selling in applying for a job, you're selling yourself and your services to a company. And so what I was thinking of how a lot of people, or maybe probably what I have always done in the past, is when we are applying for a job, we create a CV and we fill it up with all of our accomplishments and detailing all the things that we have done, showing we've accomplished this, we've done that, we've had this experience. Look how fantastic I am. Trying to sell ourselves that way, just by saying how fantastic we are. But when you think of it on the other side, if you think of it from the employer's point of view, what is it that they are looking for? What is it when they see a CV? Is they are looking for a fit into their company and into a role which they need. They're looking for, how is this person going to fulfill my needs or my wants? Okay. So if we apply for a job, thinking about the other person, thinking about the employer, and then demonstrating what we're going to do for them, that puts us in a much more better standpoint, a much more better position in order to get that job. Yeah. So maybe you can think the next time you're applying for a job, what is it? And understanding maybe the company a lot more. Maybe doing your research and finding how you can benefit them in some way. So I want to go through this idea now, kind of coming into the more emotional part and understanding how we start making decisions. And we come back to Chris Voss's ideas on negotiation, that no matter whatever human you're talking to, even if you think you're considered the most vile of people, all of us all have this emotional center. And every single person is always looking for some kind of common ground, all these kind of shared goals or interests in everybody. Like we're constantly looking for that. We're always looking for that connection. And that's why, as Chris Voss's experience as a negotiator found, that we were always looking for that rapport, maybe not on a subconscious level, maybe not consciously, but on a subconscious level, we're always looking for that that kind of connection in order to feel kind of be understood, in order to feel important. And then understanding these differences is extremely important, because maybe if you understand the differences, as I said, you don't have to agree with them, but understanding them builds that rapport, builds that kind of positive atmosphere, so that you can start maybe negotiating better or negotiating whatever you need to do. Okay. Remember, we are completely social animals, and if you think about anybody, I'm sure we will have them any kind of disagreements or arguments maybe on a personal level or in a professional level. We have disagreements all the time. And so what I like about Dale Carnegie's book is he talks about disagreements quite a lot, and arguments. He said you'll probably never ever win an argument really, but how do a lot of people go about an argument? Is it saying, defending their ground and defending their point of view, and kind of demonstrating how they are right and the other person is wrong all the time. But think about when someone tells you you're wrong, you immediately kind of tense up and create resistance. You immediately want to just defend yourself. All of us do a lot of the time. But what happens is what Dale Carnegie kind of suggests, and I think this is what the Socrates here, one of his philosophies was that if you start getting the other person to say yes, if you start finding a common ground or the things that you agree on, and start trying to get those yes and positive, creating that positive atmosphere, finding things you agree on, and then that kind of starts building a positive atmosphere in order to you then to maybe argue better, maybe people are a bit more open to your point of view. Yeah, so understanding a difference and building a rapport kind of puts you in a much better stead to negotiate or get what you want or influence however you want. And so I'll move on to this social experiment. And anybody who's ever studied psychology might be familiar with this experiment. And so this really demonstrates one, and maybe I didn't mention at the start actually, as much as this is about us maybe persuading, influencing, I kind of wanted to talk about how these techniques are kind of used on us on an everyday, maybe in marketing or getting us to buy things. And this is a really good demonstration of how we are kind of easily manipulated or influenced by anybody else. So this was an experiment done in the 1950s by Solomon Asch, and it's called the Asch conformity experiment. So what Solomon Asch did was he took a lot of participants, I think they were male students at the time, a lot of students, and got them in to do what he told them was this simple vision test. So it would be like asking them to look at this kind of one of these boxes, something similar to this, and say which lines match up. So they're very simple questions with very obvious responses. And what he did, so each participant was by themselves, but they were within a group of actors, and they were in on the experiment. So one person who thought he was just in a vision test, the other people were actors. And what he did, he started with a series of experiments, and everybody was given the right answer. consistently. But then at some point, all of the actors started to give consistently the wrong answer all the time, and the participant was at the end and seeing this and was starting getting confused on a very early on, saying how can people be not seeing that this is the right answer, starting to consistently give wrong answers. And what they were finding is that, unbelievably enough, 75% of the participants conformed with the other people at least once and started giving a wrong answer, even if they knew it was incorrect. And this is really quite an amazing one. So it seems like 75% of us, when we're under that social pressure, when other people in the room, even if it's only 3 or 4 people, consistently giving an opinion or an answer which we know is wrong, 75% of us will conform with other people. And it kind of demonstrates the power of social influence or social manipulation, if you like, that we all kind of could be subjected to. And so there's been really over demonstration of this, and I saw a video of it, which I don't have slides on now, of a video of an influencer. So it was one person. What he did, he hired a load of photographers, like paparazzi photographers, and in the street just started getting them to start taking photos of him as if he was famous. But he was nobody, he was just like one of us, a normal person. But what happened is he was getting other people from the street coming over, thinking he was famous and asking to start taking selfies with them of him as if he was famous, but they had no idea who he was. But because he was getting all his attention from paparazzi or what appeared to be paparazzi, people thought, wow, this guy must be really important and he's been really famous. I want to get in on this. So it's something that really demonstrates how social influence can really manipulate or influence us on that level. And this is what kind of demonstrates that how emotional a lot of our decisions are. I think we tend to think that decisions are logical a lot of time. We kind of make decisions based on logical reasoning, and we kind of go through. But it seems that this is what psychology is really discovering significantly is pretty much all decisions are social, are emotional. And this kind of really gives you the importance, emphasizes that kind of importance of feeling important, of empathy, connection, and acceptance from people, because that really influences our decision making a lot of time. And it seems that in experiments that have been doing now, then if there's any absence of any kind of emotional markers or any kind of any absence of any emotional decision making, is that much more difficult for us to carry out. And so this next topic, which is kind of another one, is kind of coming on to the sales techniques of all of this. And maybe many of you are familiar with this guy. It's called Jordan Belfort. So if you've seen the film The Wolf of Wall Street, Leonardo DiCaprio portrayed him and what he did back in the 90s in his brokerage. So Jordan Belfort was a broker and he made millions and millions because of his exceptionally good sales techniques. And if you've seen the film or read the book, you realize that it went a little bit out of control, and he did some things which are not ethically sound, and he was put away, and he lost his business empire essentially. But what he did after he did his time, he started doing then training courses on how sales techniques, and he's written this book which is very, very useful called Way of the Wolf. So it's demonstrating all his sales techniques and how useful they are, because he is, even if you don't agree with his moral principles, of course, I don't think we can agree with what he did, but he's an exceptional salesman. And so in his book, he talks about all these kind of the very good tactics and strategies about sales, which is really coming into persuasion and influence, and how we can, because sales is a task of communication and persuading and influencing. And so the first one is about tonality and body language. So he really discusses the importance of kind of confidence and how we portray confidence and tonality and body language. And and how you say things and body language really influence significantly in sales or any kind of persuasion. Because when we're communicating, we pick up a lot more on these body language cues, much more to some extent on actually what we're saying. Okay. If you are kind of gain confidence in what you're saying, if you kind of look like you're assertive in what you're saying rather than because you are not confident, then that really kills a lot of the message that you're putting across. And so if you convey confidence, enthusiasm, and certainty, a lot of certainty in what you're saying, that really kind of puts it, emphasizes your message even more, gives it a lot more authority in what you're saying. And this is kind of in one way leads into building rapport. So we, on a subconscious level, we typically follow leaders who are confident and strong, obviously. And so if you're kind of conveying that kind of in your body language, this enthusiasm, this confidence, this authority, then that does building rapport. And this is what you're finding in sales. If you're starting to build a rapport, build a social connection with other people, that really lays the groundwork really well in making a sale or even in convincing. And so this is really something I'm trying to what I'm finding in the several years now I've started teaching, because what I do as a lecturer, and what all of us do as lecturers, we want to teach things. And I'm finding that the importance of building a rapport with students means that they kind of listening to me a lot more. Like a big part of my job is persuade and influence it and trying to get students to listen to me and learn what I'm saying. And I come back to this TED Talk, which I found, which a woman in the US was talking to a disgruntled teacher who said that that he wasn't paid for the children to like him or the students to like him. But she responded, well, if they don't like you, then they're not going to learn anything from you. And I think if you remember, if you have any teachers from school, you listen and you learn from the ones who you liked more than the ones you didn't, typically. Well, maybe more. Okay. So it's kind of really, and this kind of comes through into sales as well. If you build in that rapport, and of course, if you have anybody has a client in engineering, if you build in rapport, they're much more likely to come back to you. It's establishing trust and it's creating a connection, which is what we're all kind of fundamentally looking for. And then the last one is handling objections. So this is something that kind of very much a sales techniques, but I think it really comes into anything kind of maybe like a preparation, is when people are maybe being persuaded or being told, like communicators something, maybe people will come up with objections, maybe people will come up with counter arguments and stuff. But it's really important to be able to be able to counter them very well, anticipate any objections, acknowledge them, but importantly, acknowledge them and understand that point of view, and then respond in a way which is kind of coherent and addresses the concerns and addresses it and with more confidence and authority. And this really comes back again to the importance of listening, is listening to their concerns and listening to what they are countering with. Yeah. So as well, I think it's really important. Like, I think it's really an interesting part of sales and how it's very much a communication exercise, and at the end of the day, it's sales techniques. So this is something I do because this is one of my lectures. This whole webinar is one of my lectures I do for my communications module, and one of the assignment I give the students, but I have done this kind of recent anyway. But what I've given the students is putting themselves in the perspective of if they were having to persuade a client on something. So their assignment is that they have a client like already established, and what they need to do is persuade that client into adopting a more sustainable method of construction. So in this case, a client wants a new building, like an office building, and the students need to kind of persuade them to be much more sustainable rather than maybe the institute concrete techniques that was kind of traditional, doing something much more sustainable. So what I get them to do first is try and see the client side and what their motivations are, what are they looking for. And that could be, well, everyone's different, of course, but maybe and this is a non-exhaustive list, maybe a lot of their motivations is economical. Maybe they want it as cheap as possible. Typically, maybe they want it to be aesthetically pleasing, you would hope, maybe to show off. You want it to be maybe low maintenance, so there's not really much of a hassle. And a lot of the time, we want it to be as fast as possible. So And of course, there's a lot of other reasons which I try and get them to understand and see that point of view. Yeah. So then what they do is I try and use that information and then come up with arguments and persuasion to persuade the client to go green. Okay. So try and demonstrate if it can it be cheaper in some way? Can it be more aesthetically pleasing? Can it be low maintenance if that's possible? On all of these kind of things. So, and it's interesting the kind of the results that I'm getting from that. But just try and think like if you do have a client or you have someone which you need to persuade, always think about their point of view. Try and understand what do they want, what their motivations, and go from there. But also think as well, I think what's an important one is, and this is probably one I should have mentioned in Jordan Belfort's book, is he always says that not everybody is sellable. Not everybody is influenced. And what he says is straight line technique is you kind of determine where that person is on the straight line. So maybe you find out a person it's not even possible to influence. If you find out their motivations and there's not much hope in hell of motivating them, then you find out at a very early stage. Yeah. So if we come back now to kind of selling the pen. So I don't know if what I've told you now is maybe influence or change your first answer. Like how would you now go about selling a pen or even selling anything really? Like we've talked a lot about empathy and motivations and stuff, but just thinking now about like if you would change it, but I think that with the first one and if you ever see any training courses by Jordan Belfort, he does this all the time. And the first question that he would say would be to ask is to then start finding out the person you're selling to, their motivations, like what is it they're looking for. So the first question might be, what is it? How long have you been looking for a pen? Or what is it you're looking in a pen? Try and find out as much information about their motivations for buying a pen, even if they even want to buy a pen. And if you sign it, I'm not even interested. Okay, it's done. But if there's some information there, start pricing it out, understanding it, creating that rapport, creating that kind of what their motivation is, and then going from that. Okay. So that's kind of wrapping up anyway in the summary. So I just want to kind of reiterate maybe the main point is kind of practicing that idea of empathy. And I think that helps us in any of our communication techniques is being aware of other people, what do they want, seeing it from their perspective. Like whenever you're writing an email, now think about what's the person on the other side, what's the information that they're going to get from that email. And is it going to be clear? Is it going to make sense? Is it going to be clear or do you need to make a phone call because it's not very clear enough? You know, always try and see things from the point of view of the other people. And that's, I think we're just about on time, which is done quite well. That is pretty much it. So maybe I'll open up to any questions if there is. And of course, maybe I'll mention again, I'd ask if anybody if be kind enough to fill in the survey for the research project. Really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for listening. I hope you've learned something from it. So